That statement, when I was reading it, I thought if someone would have said that to me 2 years ago, it would have been sort of a nonsensical statement.
Everybody was trying to do this because it seemed like an obvious path to get more users, and nobody could agree on an approach. They basically immediately become the obvious choice because most people, like, let's face it, don't want to have a dependency on Ethereum these days.
And it adds up so fast that if you don't have the EVM, it is so difficult.
We're super excited about that future. And it actually feels like within reach for the first time in a decade.
Cosmos, the best place to build on the EVM. Now, that statement, when I was reading it, I thought if someone would have said that to me 2 years ago, it would have been sort of a nonsensical statement. I guess perhaps for those of you here in this room who are like unfamiliar with what's been happening in Cosmos for the last couple of months, who are you and why are you relevant to this conversation?
So I'm Barry. Mag and I are co-CEOs of Interchain Labs. We say Cosmos Labs a lot because many people don't know what Interchain is. But we are the core team now behind the development of the Cosmos Hub, the Cosmos Stack, the Cosmos ecosystem. Before this, we were building infrastructure and products for Cosmos chains, really focused on helping folks drive users and liquidity to their chain. So we built SkipGo, which is kind of an interop bridging aggregator that is used now to process 2/3 of all IBC transactions in the Cosmos ecosystem, does about $1 billion of volume a month in and out of the ecosystem, mostly in stablecoins. And while we were building those products, the Interchain Foundation was trying to figure out how it could bring a lot of new energy and life into the ecosystem, and sort of reached out to us as a team that had good relationships with most of the existing chains, that was working on solving the liquidity problems to acquire us and can bring us up to try to work on the ecosystem with a lot more resources and a lot more focus. And so now that's what we do for the stack, for the hub, and the Cosmos EVM is one of the first things that we've really started working on.
Yeah, not to necessarily repeat the things I was saying earlier, but I think we really wanted to have a way to basically appeal to modern developers in crypto. And in Cosmos we had Cosmos EVM, which I think was for a very long time a very exciting VM, but I think VMs over time have had real scaling effects or network effects. And the EVM, I think, has shown time and time again that, in my heart, is probably not the best technology to build smart contracts, but I think we've seen really wide adoption. And so we wanted to make it available to all of our customers in Cosmos and make sure it was different from a normal EVM deployment. It was something that had superpowers that only being on your own chain could have. Historically, people choose Cosmos because it's a true L1. It has its own consensus. It has its own governance. It has an incredible interoperability stack built around it with both IBC and then also great folks like Union and Axelar and the other things available in Cosmos. But then to extend that into a place where you can also access the best developers in crypto. And right now, a lot of those developers train up on EVM, and so bringing them into Cosmos we felt was really important. And so it's going to be added as one of the open source and fully maintained parts of the Cosmos stack by the foundation and by Cosmos Labs. And so it's going to be offered alongside IBC and Comet BFT and Cosmos SDK as an official part of the stack.
So you mentioned Cosmos, and I think one of the things that attracted me to Cosmos and like other projects that like we invested in as a fund, for instance, Movement, it was this idea that like the EVM, although it has massive market penetration, I didn't feel was the long-term viable solution for building blockchains like 30 years out. and that there were new, more modern VMs in the space that were addressing some of the issues and like new infrastructure kind of considerations around interoperability, around security that weren't really part of the picture in 2014 when the EVM was conceived. But it has the market penetration, I think, like as an ecosystem today, to have access to EVM liquidity and to have access to EVM chains makes a lot of sense. So let's say like for Cosmos developers who have been for the last how many years carrying this thesis that like EVM bad, alt VM's good, how do we convince them now to like start writing in Solidity, and what is really the driving force here behind the statement that Cosmos is the best place to build EVM chains?
Yeah. So maybe helpful to talk a little bit about why we prioritize this. When we got acquired a few months ago and the ICF was like, okay, figure out what to do. One of the really big things that I had been following for like 2 years was there was this Telegram chat. Many of you guys might have been in it. It was sort of titled something like, what to do about EVM on Cosmos. And it had like 50 or 100 of some of the best developers that I know, folks from Barachain, folks from Osmosis, Story, all of the core teams that were working on the stack. Everyone was debating like how they could possibly put an EVM on Cosmos in a way that allowed wallet compatibility, allowed infrastructure compatibility for things like Chainlink, and allowed application compatibility for things like Uniswap. Everybody was trying to do this because it seemed like an obvious path to get more users, to be able to get protocols that capital allocators already trust, basically just open up the doors to the billions of dollars of capital and the tens of thousands of developers that are kind of active in this other ecosystem. And nobody could agree on an approach. Everybody had their own really strong point of view about how it should be done. And the ICF at that point had basically like steered clear of the whole thing and wasn't funding or contributing to any EVM solution. And we, at the same time, had been talking to a lot of people who were thinking about building on the Cosmos stack. And the main reason that people were picking Arbitrum or Optimism or Avalanche, in addition to, at some points, being offered $50 or $100 million to go and do that, was, and still picking Cosmos, was they wanted an EVM. They were like, that's a non-negotiable, right? They didn't want to bet on a different VM. They wanted to bet on their application or their unique distribution in the case of something like Telegram's app chain. And they wanted to keep the rest super simple. And so it felt really obvious, I think, to us. You combine both of these things, right? Like existing Cosmos chains are like, we need more users, liquidity, infrastructure, applications in the IBC network, and all of these other people with distribution, liquidity, users, something special. We're like, we need an EVM and we want to build L1s. It's like, okay, like let's actually just take a bet on this thing and combine these things. And I think it's been really effective. I mean, we see a whole new crop of Cosmos chains already building with it. And we're like trying to tell them like, slow down, like please don't launch yet. Like we need to finish a few things. But Ripple, Telegram, Ondo, one of Tether's new stablecoin chains, it's basically immediately become the obvious choice because most people, like, let's face it, don't want to have a dependency on Ethereum these days, right? They don't want to be an L2. They want to be an L1.
They want sovereignty.
Yeah, exactly. They just want the Ethereum VM. They don't want the rest of that. So.
Yeah, I would say like the other thing is Cosmos is really like an ecosystem of ecosystems, right? You have it's not sort of the same kind of approach that Ethereum is taking, where you have an L1 and a bunch of L2s. It's a bunch of really strong independent ecosystems. So, for example, you have Anisha, right, which is its own ecosystem, also building in Cosmos. You have Kronos. You have all of these different ecosystems of ecosystems. And the reality is a lot of people come to Cosmos because they want to build their own ecosystem, right? Some want to be app chains, but a lot of people want to build their own entire ecosystem from the ground up. And one thing we've learned is it's so hard to do that today. It's so difficult to build an ecosystem from scratch because you need so many base elements that you take for granted, right? The MetaMask integration, you need liquidity, you need to have your own DEX, you need to have your own Oracle, you need to have your own indexers, block explorers, relayers, all of these different things. And it adds up so fast that if you don't have the EVM, you need to build custom versions of that. It is so difficult and so expensive. And so really, because our customers are ecosystem builders, they're not just app builders, they're ecosystem builders, I think the EVM really helps them get a big jump start on building that kind of distribution and that kind of setup.
So there's been a couple of attempts in the last couple of years to put the EVM on Tendermint or Comet BFT, and a lot of those I think have not been successful. There's some exceptions, right? Like I think Kronos probably still has an EVM, right? And but others that were seen as the sort of next frontier did not succeed. Why do you think that is, and why is this different? How is this different? Yeah. Maybe let's focus on why it's different and why this might work as opposed to trying to dissect
why they failed.
Why they failed.
Well, I actually think sort of dissecting why they failed is also useful. We're basically just working backwards from a couple of really simple things. One is compatibility with the full developer toolchain. So, a huge part of the reason that we want support for the EVM is that tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of developer hours have been poured into building really excellent tooling for creating smart contracts, for testing them, for deploying them. And we're just trying to make sure that we're compatible with all of that tooling. And if you had taken any of the previous existing EVMs, Ethermint or one of these others, and you just said, okay, I want to run like the standard Uniswap deployment script, it would have failed. Like if you had just tried to do one thing with your product, it wouldn't have worked. And so I guess the simple thing that we do is we work backwards in the developer experience. We actually we use all these tools, we make sure they work. We work with really good teams that are super familiar with the EVM who have always wanted to build in Cosmos, who've never been able to, who then try to build with us and they say, okay, hey, here's this problem, here's this other thing. So I think it's just being very product focused and working backwards from that. And then the second thing that we cared a lot about that I think the Barachain team, for instance, didn't care about is ensuring that all of the functionality you might normally get from the Cosmos side is still available, right? So that's still available to users, so people can use IBC, they can stake, they can participate in governance, and it's available to developers, so you can write a custom application and you can expose it to users through a precompile. And you can use vote extensions to build a custom Oracle or a custom Bitcoin bridge, or we see people doing lots of different things there.
So the kinds of things that people were building with Cosmwasm, people will be able to build here
exactly. Yeah. So we wanted sort of the distribution of the EVM and really good compatibility with that tool chain, and we wanted to get that without giving up the Cosmos functionality. And I think it turns out if you really focus on both of those things and you just have really good intensity about working backwards from that, you can do it. It's not like an impossible problem.
Right. And I mean, with your work on Slinky and some of these other tools, so that's all being integrated into the EVM.
Yeah, we're making sure that you can, DYDX, for example, is a big user of the sort of native Oracle that we built, and they have talked about adopting Cosmwasm in the past, but their big focus is users and liquidity, and they want MetaMask to work on their chain, so they're looking at the EVM now and are kind of helping us, again, make sure that all that stuff just works. So you get all the Cosmos goodness, and you get the distribution of the EVM.
So I think there's a lingering question here, which is the hub, our beloved Cosmos hub, and I'm an Atom holder. I have been since Genesis. I think a lot of people here have. And we were chatting last night, just like there seems to be a floor at $4, which is just like all the people who bought and they're just like never going to sell. And you know, probably most of those people fit in a room. What's the future for the hub with this new EVM vision? And how does the hub, you know, for years we've been talking about utility of the hub and giving it a sense of utility in this ecosystem of chains. What's your vision for that?
Yeah, I could take a shot at that. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Atom is sort of the core of a lot of what we do. That our business model is driving value to Atom in a very real way. And I would separate out the hub from Atom as a token, right? The hub historically has only done one thing and one thing only, which is issue Atom. And I think, at least for the time being, you know, we are focused on this Cosmos EVM as a form of expanding Cosmos and a way of bringing institutions and customers we couldn't access before to the Cosmos ecosystem in a way that benefits Atom, right? And focusing less on sort of, you know, how those different EVMs need to deploy on the Cosmos hub directly or something like that, because we really want to keep this vision of app chains alive, right? And this vision of building an ecosystem of ecosystems alive. So, I mean, that's the short answer. I think the slightly longer answer is we're developing a ton of services around this EVM that we think are going to be really incredible, that I think will expand the capacities of the institutions building on the EVM that have a direct financial relationship with Atom. So, you know, in particular, IBC Eureka is something that utilizes the hub in a way that is beneficial to Atom, but that also provides bridging services to some of these chains. And we're building more things like that, especially around Skip Go and around other services that we think are going to be really good and help these organizations scale to sort of their next level.
And what's the role of IBC in all this? I mean, I think there's like 3 parts of the Cosmos stack, right? There's the hub, there's the Cosmos SDK and IBC, and there has been Cosmos WASM now. Maybe Cosmos WASM takes a bit of a step back, and the EVM takes more of a prominent place in the ecosystem moving forward. But IBC's been a major feature of Cosmos, and yeah, curious how that integrates within all of this and how we leverage IBC to bring in liquidity and users from other ecosystems as well.
Yeah. It's a super good question. We think that the main value of IBC today is you can build a chain, you don't have to worry about interop with all of these other different folks that are already built with an IBC compatible chain, where they're going to have that native bridge out of the box to everywhere, which doesn't exist on any of these other kind of EVM L2 stacks or anything like that. And so we think the value of that network gets much, much higher, like exponentially higher, if we get more really large teams, asset issuers, institutions into the network. So starting with things like Ripple and the Telegram application chain and Tether's new chain, like we think this is kind of like the next wave. Then I think working on some of these market-leading DeFi protocols that are talking about building their own chains, like, and you see this happening even in, you know, the Solana ecosystem, where it's like, you know, oh, everybody's supposed to build on Solana and accrue value to Sol. Like, Pump is going to have their own chain, like very kind of openly held secret in the industry. And then, you know, after that, I think what we're really excited about is, you know, real companies are starting just now to really get into the industry in a huge way. Fintechs like Robinhood, right? Like they're probably announcing a chain today. More traditional institutions like JP Morgan are releasing stable coins. Like we think, and if you talk to these folks, you talk to banks or you talk to these big payment companies, what they'll tell you is they have a lot of concerns about just building on a public blockchain because they really want control, right? They're used to running all of their own infrastructure. They're used to writing all of their own stuff from scratch. Like just throwing something on Solana and walking away is scary. But they also understand that that's kind of the, the interoperability and the connectivity to these other places is sort of the value of actually kind of having a blockchain or participating in crypto in some way. And so we sort of see a future where, all of these different banks and institutions and central banks have their own chains and they interoperate freely, and they're issuing, CBDC, central bank digital currencies, stable coins, their own securities on chain, and IBC is, part of the rails that all of that is running over. We're super excited about that future. And it actually feels like within reach for the first time in a decade. So
I would add one thing, which is I think like the market, irrespective of Cosmos marketing efforts, has like very clearly shown that the right vision for crypto was an internet of blockchains versus the whole internet on one blockchain. Like that is very clearly not happening. And as Barry was saying, the best applications keep spinning out of their native ecosystems into their own chain. And I think one of the things that we've thought about at Cosmos for 6 years ahead of everyone else is how do you make that internet scale? And IBC is the core piece of that, right? IBC is the absolute best contender, in my opinion, at being a replacement for HTTP and HTTPS in an internet of blockchains. It already does it, right? And it does it at scale, and it scales laterally. It has incredible properties around security. It's never been hacked. So I think we have, probably some of the best technology to do that. And one thing that makes me really happy is that there's so many teams outside of us that are scaling IBC, right? There's the Union team, there's Polymer, there's, who are some of the other ones? Toki Finance, scaling it to banks, doing collaboration to integrate it directly into Swift. There's so many teams working on scaling that standard, which you don't see for any other bridge, right? Who's scaling layer 0 besides layer 0, right? Who's scaling Axelar besides Axelar? Like you don't have that kind of open network that is attractive to a bunch of people. And that I think you really need to scale into something that looks like world scale.
It looks like app chains are back. Or maybe
they always have been.
They never left. All right, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Seb.